The black maid was falsely accused of theft until the Mafia boss opened the security footage. A shocking scene unfolded in one of the most luxurious mansions in the city, a place where wealth and power ran through the walls like a secret. The staff had always kept their heads down, following the rules, working tirelessly under the watchful eyes of their employer, the notorious Mafia boss, Dominic Valentino. But today was different. It all started when a valuable necklace, a priceless heirloom that had been passed down through generations, went missing. The necklace was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It was said to be worth millions, with a history so deep, it could ruin anyone who dared touch it. All eyes turned to Lila, the black maid who had been with the family for years. She was always so quiet, doing her work with grace and efficiency, but she was the only one who had been in the room where the necklace was last seen. The accusations were swift, and the evidence, though circumstantial, seemed damning. The housekeeper, a woman who had always looked down on Lila, was the first to voice the accusations, followed by the other staff members, who had no choice but to fall in line. Lila's hands trembled as she stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the harsh stares of the household. The guests, unaware of the tension building in the air, sipped their champagne and chatted, oblivious to the storm brewing in the mansion. The weight of the situation crushed Lila's spirit. She knew she hadn't taken the necklace, but how could she prove it? Her heart pounded in her chest as the murmurs grew louder. She had no choice but to remain silent, to let the accusations wash over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The tension in the room was palpable when Dominic Valentino, the Mafia boss, finally entered the room. The man who had built an empire from nothing, who commanded fear and respect with a single word, now stood there, his cold eyes scanning the situation. He had seen everything unfold from a distance. His guests, his staff, and his maid. There was something about the whole thing that didn't sit right with him, but he said nothing, merely observing the scene unfold. The room fell silent as he approached Lila. His presence alone was enough to make everyone stop in their tracks. Lila's knees shook as she met his gaze, but she didn't speak. Dominic wasn't just a Mafia boss. He was a man who knew how to read people, how to spot a lie from a mile away. He didn't believe for a second that Lila had stolen the necklace, but there was only one way to prove it. He turned toward his bodyguard, his voice low and commanding. "Show me the security footage." The tension in the mansion was suffocating. Everyone was holding their breath as Dominic Valentino, the infamous Mafia boss, stood silently, his cold gaze fixed on Lila. The entire room had fallen into a deep, uneasy silence. No one dared to speak, not even the housekeeper who had started the accusations. She was watching, but her confidence had quickly turned to uncertainty. Lila stood still, her body trembling as she fought back the overwhelming urge to plead her innocence. She had worked for this family for years, always respectful, always diligent, and yet here she was, accused of something she could never even dream of doing. She felt the eyes of everyone in the room burn into her, but it was Dominic's gaze that felt the most intense. He was a man who commanded respect without uttering a word, and in his eyes, Lila saw a glimmer of something she had not expected, doubt. She had been accused of stealing a priceless heirloom, a necklace passed down through generations in the Valentino family, but Lila knew, without a doubt, that she had not taken it. The weight of the accusations had crushed her, but Dominic's presence, though intimidating, gave her a strange sense of hope. He had not spoken yet, but his silence was not one of indifference. He was carefully observing, taking in every detail, as though he were calculating his next move. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "Show me the security footage," he said, his voice calm but commanding. It was a simple order, yet it carried a weight that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. Lila's heart skipped a beat. The security footage. That was the only way to prove her innocence, to show that she had nothing to do with the missing necklace. She had known the cameras were everywhere in the mansion, but she had never imagined they would be the key to her freedom. The tension in the room thickened as Dominic turned and gestured for his bodyguard to follow him. The bodyguard, a tall and imposing figure, nodded and swiftly moved toward the security room. Lila stood frozen, her thoughts racing. What if the footage showed something else? What if it turned out that the necklace had been taken by someone else, and she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Her mind spun with possibilities. each one more terrifying than the last. As the bodyguard disappeared down the hallway, Lila couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment her life would change forever. She had no idea what to expect from the footage, but she knew one thing for sure. Her entire future rested on it. The minutes stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity. Lila could feel her palms growing clammy, her heart racing in her chest. She glanced around the room at the staff, all of whom had turned their attention to her. The housekeeper, who had been the loudest in her accusations, avoided her gaze, her face flushed with embarrassment. The guests, once oblivious to the drama unfolding, were now whispering among themselves, their curiosity piqued by the strange tension in the air. Finally, the door to the security room opened. The bodyguard reappeared, followed by Dominic, who held a tablet in his hand. He didn't say a word as he approached Lila, his eyes still fixed on her. He held up the tablet, and the footage began to play. The screen flickered for a moment, and then Lila saw herself on the footage. She was in the hallway, just outside the room where the necklace had been last seen. She could see her own face, her expression calm and focused as she carried out her duties. But what caught her attention was the figure that appeared behind her. It was the housekeeper, the one who had accused her. Lila's heart sank as she watched the footage unfold. The housekeeper had entered the room just after Lila had passed by, and in the video, it was clear that she had been the one to touch the necklace. Lila's mind raced as she realized what had happened. The housekeeper had framed her, planting the necklace in a place where it could be easily found, knowing that all eyes would be on Lila. The betrayal was more than she could bear. As the footage continued, Lila saw the moment when the housekeeper slipped the necklace into a drawer, carefully closing it, and then stepping away as though nothing had happened. The camera had captured it all. Dominic didn't look at Lila as the footage ended. He simply stared at the screen for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he handed the tablet to his bodyguard. The room was still, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, Dominic spoke. "This is not how we handle things in my house," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You will be dealt with." Lila's heart skipped a beat. The housekeeper, who had once been so confident, now looked pale and shaken. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Dominic turned to his staff, his eyes narrowing. "As for the rest of you," he said, his tone sharp, "I expect loyalty. Betrayal is not something we tolerate." The tension in the room broke as the housekeeper, now visibly trembling, was escorted out of the room. Lila stood there, her heart still pounding in her chest, as she realized that, for the first time, she was truly free. But the freedom came at a cost, and as the staff filed out of the room, Dominic's gaze lingered on Lila for just a moment longer than necessary. He nodded, his expression unreadable, before turning and leaving the room. Lila was left alone, her mind still reeling from the turn of events. She had been falsely accused, but in the end, justice had prevailed. The room was still, the air thick with tension as the final words echoed in Lila's mind. "This is not how we handle things in my house." Dominic Valentino's voice, calm but firm, had left no room for argument. The housekeeper, who had been the source of the accusations, had been escorted out, and with her, the last bit of animosity seemed to leave the mansion. Lila stood in the middle of the room, the chaos of the previous moments slowly fading away. It was hard to believe that in the span of a few minutes, everything had changed. She was no longer the woman accused of stealing. She was no longer the person under suspicion. She had been exonerated, and justice had been served. The weight that had hung over her shoulders like a suffocating blanket had lifted, but it left a new, unsettling feeling in its place. As the last of the staff members filed out of the room, Dominic remained. He had not said much to Lila after the footage was shown, but the intensity of his gaze spoke volumes. She knew that his silence was not indifference. He was watching her, studying her every movement, as if trying to decide something. "Lila," Dominic's voice broke the stillness, his tone softer now, though still carrying an authority that could not be ignored. Lila's heart skipped a beat. She had never been on the receiving end of his direct attention before, and it felt like a spotlight was on her, brighter than ever. "Yes, Mr. Valentino." Her voice came out shaky, though she tried to keep her composure. "Come with me," he said simply. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked towards the door, his footsteps steady and purposeful. Lila hesitated for a moment before following him. Her legs felt weak beneath her, as if she had been running on adrenaline for too long, and now, finally, the reality of the situation was starting to set in. She had been accused of theft, and now, she was being summoned by the man who had made the final call in her defense. The long corridor was lined with opulent paintings and expensive decorations, the walls a silent reminder of the wealth and power that Dominic held in his grasp. They walked in silence, the only sound the soft click of Lila's shoes against the marble floor. She had been in this mansion countless times before, but now, everything felt different. They reached the study, and Dominic opened the door with a casual ease. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Lila hesitated once more, but sat down, her hands resting in her lap, trying to hide the trembling that still coursed through her body. Dominic didn't sit at first. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds outside. The view was breathtaking, the mansion sitting high above the city, surrounded by meticulously kept gardens and the distant hum of traffic far below. "I didn't believe you took it," Dominic finally spoke, his voice low, but it carried the weight of truth. Lila's heart clenched in her chest. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had expected silence, maybe even more coldness. But the admission, even though simple, made her feel seen for the first time. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She had always felt like an invisible part of the staff, someone who was never truly noticed, except when there was work to be done. But now, in the presence of the Mafia boss, she felt something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't pity or disdain. It was something else. "I trust the people who work for me, Lila," Dominic continued, turning to face her now. "I do not tolerate betrayal, but I also do not jump to conclusions. That is something that a lot of people in my position fail to understand." Lila nodded, unsure of what to say. She wanted to thank him, to express her gratitude for his belief in her, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. She wasn't used to being treated with such respect. It was almost overwhelming. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" Dominic asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. Lila nodded again, her hands now resting in her lap, gripping the edge of her skirt tightly. "Almost 5 years," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, without warning, he moved to the desk and picked up a folder. He opened it and glanced at the papers inside before looking back at Lila. "I'm giving you a raise, Lila," he said. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lila couldn't quite process them. "A raise?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "Yes," Dominic confirmed. "You've been loyal, and I value loyalty. I believe you've earned it." Lila felt her heart race. She hadn't expected anything like this. A raise? She had been accused of theft not an hour ago, and now Dominic was offering her something more than she could have ever dreamed of. Lila started, but Dominic raised a hand to stop her. "I don't want to hear any protests," he said firmly. "You'll take it, and you'll accept it because you deserve it." Lila sat back in her chair, still stunned by the unexpected turn of events. She had expected her life to be thrown into chaos, to lose her job, to face consequences for something she didn't do. But instead, she was being offered a chance to start fresh, to be seen, and to be valued in a way she had never imagined. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Dominic nodded, his expression softening slightly. "You're welcome, Lila. Just don't forget who you are. People will try to bring you down, but you are not defined by their words." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Lila sitting in the chair, her mind spinning with the reality of what had just happened. She had been falsely accused, but in the end, she had been given a gift she hadn't asked for, a chance to rebuild her life, one step at a time. Lila sat in the chair in Dominic Valentino's office, her mind racing as the reality of the past few days began to sink in. It was only hours ago that she had been accused of stealing a priceless heirloom, a necklace that held so much history and value. Now, she sat here, in front of the very man who had almost fired her, but instead, had done something completely unexpected. He had believed in her. And not just that, he had offered her a raise, a reward for her loyalty, something she hadn't even dared hope for. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. "You've earned it." Her thoughts were interrupted as Dominic turned from the door and walked back toward her. His expression was still calm, but there was something in his eyes now, something softer, almost thoughtful. He didn't sit at his desk this time. Instead, he leaned against the table in front of her. "You did well," he said, his voice steady, but there was a hint of approval. Lila looked up at him, still processing everything. "I didn't expect all of this," she said softly, unsure of how to respond. Dominic nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Most people don't," he said simply. "But I'm not most people." He straightened up, his posture commanding. "You see, Lila, loyalty isn't something I take lightly. It's rare, and when I find it, I recognize it." Lila nodded, still trying to understand where all of this was leading. The man who had ruled over this house with an iron fist, who had the power to destroy anyone who crossed him, had chosen to protect her instead. "But you've also earned something else, something more than just a raise," Dominic continued, his voice lower now, as if sharing something personal. "Respect." Lila's heart skipped a beat. Respect. It wasn't something she had ever expected, not from someone in his position, not from someone with so much power. She had always felt like just another invisible worker, a nameless face in a sea of staff. But now, Dominic was saying that she was different. "I'm giving you more responsibility," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "You'll be overseeing the other staff. I'll be trusting you with a bigger role, one that comes with more power and more authority." Lila's breath caught in her throat. Overseeing the staff? She had never imagined being in charge of anyone, let alone being trusted with such an important role in the mansion. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice a little shaky. Dominic gave her a small smile, a rare gesture that softened his usually stern features. "I'm sure. I've been watching you, Lila. You have a sense of responsibility, and you've proven that you can handle pressure. This is a chance for you to show that you can lead." Lila didn't know what to say. The offer was too much to take in all at once. She had gone from being the maid accused of theft to being given a position of power and trust in the household. It felt surreal. But Dominic was watching her closely, waiting for her response. "I accept," she said finally, her voice steady. "Thank you." Dominic nodded, his expression approving. "Good. You'll start tomorrow. I'll have a meeting arranged, and you'll begin your new role." As he spoke, Lila felt a sense of pride growing inside her. She had worked for this family for so long, and now, for the first time, she felt like she was truly seen. Not just as the help, but as someone who had earned a place of respect in the household. "You've earned this, Lila," Dominic said again, his voice firm but sincere. "Just remember, this is only the beginning. There's more to come." Lila smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude wash over her. She had been through so much in the past few hours, but now, she felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. As she left Dominic's office, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope for the first time in years. The future seemed uncertain, but it also seemed full of possibilities. The mansion, once a place where she had been invisible, now felt like a place where she had a voice. And that voice was finally being heard. The following morning, Lila awoke early, the weight of her new responsibilities heavy on her shoulders. She had spent the night lying awake, turning over everything that had happened. Only a day before, she had been accused of theft, and now, she was being trusted with a position of authority. The shift in her life had been so abrupt, it felt almost surreal. But as the sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, she realized that this was her chance to prove herself, not just to the people around her, but to herself. She dressed quickly, choosing the simplest uniform she could find, a white blouse and a black skirt, though today, the outfit felt different. Today, it felt like she was stepping into a new role. She was no longer just the maid. She was the one in charge. The mansion was quiet when she arrived in the kitchen, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound in the otherwise still house. The staff was already beginning their day, moving in their usual routine, though there was a noticeable shift in the air. They were all aware of the change, of Lila's new role, but no one said anything. They simply greeted her with a nod or a quiet word. As the hours passed, Lila quickly realized how much she had to learn. Overseeing the staff was no easy task. There were schedules to maintain, duties to assign, and expectations to meet. But what struck her most was the underlying tension. She could feel the weight of the others' eyes on her, waiting for her to slip up, to fail. The housekeeper who had falsely accused her, now silent and distant, barely looked her way. Lila couldn't help but notice that even the other staff members seemed to keep their distance. She had to earn their trust, and she knew that wouldn't happen overnight. Yet, as the day went on, she found herself falling into the rhythm of her new role. She assigned tasks, gave instructions, and even stepped in to resolve a small dispute between two of the staff. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. She was no longer the one being told what to do. She was the one making decisions. The change was exhilarating, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. Later that afternoon, Lila received a call from Dominic Valentino's office. His voice, calm and authoritative as always, greeted her. "Lila, I need to speak with you in my office," he said. The simple request sent a ripple of unease through her. She had only just stepped into her new role, and now Dominic wanted to see her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it wasn't going to be a casual conversation. When she arrived at his office, Dominic was standing by the window, looking out at the view of the city below. The room was silent except for the soft sound of the air conditioning. "Lila," he began, turning to face her, "you've done well today." His approval was evident, and it made her feel a sense of pride that she hadn't expected. She hadn't been sure she could handle the pressure, but Dominic's words gave her confidence. "But there's more you need to understand," he continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Your role here isn't just about overseeing the staff. It's about maintaining control, about keeping the house running smoothly. And that means you will have to make difficult decisions. Sometimes, those decisions won't be easy." Lila's stomach twisted. She had been given the power to lead, but now she understood that with that power came responsibility. Real responsibility. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt inside. Dominic nodded, his gaze piercing as always. "Good. You'll face challenges. There will be people who will try to test you, who will try to undermine your authority. But you can't let that happen. You must remain firm, Lila. Show them that you're not just a maid anymore." His words were direct, but there was an intensity in them that made Lila's heart race. She knew what he was saying. She had to prove herself, not just to the staff, but to him and to herself. "Understood," she said, her voice clear, though her mind was still processing the weight of his words. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "You're more than capable, Lila. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." With that, he turned back to the window, signaling the end of their conversation. Lila stood there for a moment, her mind spinning. She had been given a chance to prove herself, a chance to be more than what she had been. But with that chance came expectations. The kind of expectations that could make or break her. As she left the office and walked back down the hallway, Lila's thoughts were clearer than they had been all day. She had a new role, a new responsibility, and a new sense of purpose. She was no longer invisible. She was in control. The mansion, which had once felt like a gilded cage, now felt like a place where she could make a difference. And she was determined to do just that. The next few weeks at the Valentino mansion were a whirlwind for Lila. She had been given her new role, and with it, a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. The staff was still adjusting to the changes, and so was she. But she was determined to prove herself, to show that she was more than just the maid who had been falsely accused. Every day brought new challenges, but Lila faced them head-on. She managed the schedules, assigned duties, and dealt with the occasional conflict between the staff. It wasn't easy, but Lila had grown into her role. The respect she had longed for was slowly becoming a reality, not just from the staff, but from Dominic as well. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of overseeing the household, Lila found herself in Dominic's office once more. This time, she wasn't called for a lecture or an assessment. Instead, Dominic had a different request. "Lila," he said, his voice calm as usual, though there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. "I need your help with something." Lila looked up from the paperwork she was organizing on his desk. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was ready to take on whatever challenge he had for her. "What do you need, Mr. Valentino?" she asked. Dominic walked around his desk and took a seat in the chair across from her. "There's a situation that's come up," he began, leaning forward slightly. "It involves one of our business partners. Someone I trust, but something doesn't sit right." Lila listened intently, her heart rate picking up. She had never been directly involved in any of the business side of the Valentino operations, but now she was being drawn in. "I need you to keep an eye on this person," Dominic continued, his gaze steady. I'll need someone I can trust to handle this discreetly. Lila's mind raced as she processed his words. This wasn't a task she had expected. She wasn't a businesswoman. She was just a maid who had earned a little more responsibility. But now, she was being asked to take on something far more significant. Are you sure I'm the right person for this? She asked cautiously. Dominic studied her for a moment, and then gave a small, approving nod. I trust you, he said simply. And sometimes, the people closest to me are the ones who see things others miss. I need you to be discreet. No one can know about this. Lila nodded, though uncertainty swirled inside her. She wasn't sure what kind of world she was stepping into. The deeper she got into the Valentino household, the more she realized how little she truly knew. She had always kept her distance from the more dangerous aspects of the family, but now, it seemed, she was being pulled into the heart of it. Over the next few days, Lila quietly observed the business partner in question, a man named Vincent. He was charismatic, well-spoken, and always surrounded by an air of confidence. But Lila had learned from experience that appearances could be deceiving. She took note of his actions, the subtle exchanges he had with others in the household, and the way he carried himself. The more she watched, the more she started to see small inconsistencies. Vincent was too quick to dismiss certain questions, too eager to avoid certain topics. Lila began to suspect that something was off, though she couldn't yet put her finger on it. One evening, as she walked through the mansion, she overheard a conversation between Vincent and one of Dominic's trusted associates. The words were hushed, but Lila could make out a few key phrases. Needs to be handled. Won't get away with it. The tone of their voices made Lila's stomach drop. This was bigger than she had initially thought. She didn't know exactly what was going on, but it was clear that Vincent was involved in something far darker than what she had been led to believe. The next day, Lila found herself back in Dominic's office. She had kept a close eye on Vincent, and what she had overheard only deepened her suspicions. She needed to tell Dominic what she had learned. When she entered the room, Dominic was sitting at his desk, looking over some papers. As usual, he didn't immediately look up. You wanted to see me, Mr. Valentino? Lila asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety building inside her. Dominic glanced up, his expression unreadable. Yes, Lila. Come in, sit down. She obeyed, taking the seat across from him. What's going on with Vincent? Dominic asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Lila swallowed, gathering her thoughts before speaking. I've been watching him closely, as you asked. I overheard a conversation the other night, she said, her voice calm but firm. There's something going on, Mr. Valentino. I'm not sure what, but I don't think he's as trustworthy as he seems. Dominic listened intently, his gaze never wavering. When Lila finished, he leaned back in his chair, processing what she had said. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, finally, Dominic spoke. You've done well, Lila, he said, his tone almost approving. I knew I could trust you. But this is just the beginning. Vincent won't make things easy, but I'll need you to keep going. Keep your eyes open, and don't trust anyone but me. Understand? Lila nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come so far, and now she was being drawn deeper into the world of the Valentino family, into a world of secrets and power that she had barely begun to understand. But she was determined to see this through. She had earned her place here, and she wasn't about to back down now. Days passed, and Lila continued to observe Vincent, her suspicions about his involvement growing with each passing moment. She had always been a quiet observer, but now she found herself in a position of power, a role that demanded not only attention but action. Her newfound authority in the household was both a gift and a heavy burden. The mansion, once a place of quiet work, now felt like a battlefield, and Lila was at the center of it. As the days unfolded, Lila continued to collect small pieces of evidence, noting Vincent's suspicious behavior. He had started to avoid certain areas of the house, especially the parts where Dominic's business dealings were most secretive. He was careful, but Lila was more careful. She made sure to follow him discreetly, never directly confronting him, but watching, always watching. One evening, as she was cleaning the study, Lila heard the distinct sound of a door creaking open. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She knew this was Vincent's office. He had been working late again, and the other staff members had already left for the night. With a glance around the room, Lila quietly slipped to the door, peering through a small crack. What she saw made her blood run cold. Vincent was sitting at his desk, speaking to someone on the phone, his voice low but urgent. "You'll get the money," he said, his words barely audible. "But you need to be careful. The boss has someone watching, and I'm not sure how long I can keep this going." Lila's breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind as she strained to hear the rest of the conversation. "We'll make the move soon," Vincent continued. "But there's one last thing we need to take care of. We'll settle this once and for all." Lila's mind raced as she tried to process what she had just overheard. The man she had suspected all along was involved in something far worse than she had imagined. It wasn't just about business deals or misunderstandings. This was something deeper, something dangerous. She quickly backed away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes were wide with shock, but she knew what she had to do. She couldn't keep this to herself. She had to tell Dominic. She had to act. Lila's pulse raced as she made her way to Dominic's office. Her thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear. She had just uncovered something that could change everything. She couldn't wait. As she entered the office, Dominic looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. "Lila," he said calmly, though his eyes flickered with curiosity. "What is it?" "I overheard something," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Vincent is planning something. He's working with someone, and they're making a move soon." Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, his focus immediately sharpening. "Go on," he said, his tone colder now, more businesslike. "He said something about getting money and being careful. He's worried that you have someone watching him, and he's making plans to settle something once and for all," Lila continued, her heart still racing. Dominic stood up from his desk, his movements sharp and deliberate. He didn't speak right away, but his gaze never left Lila. He was processing the information, piecing it together in his mind. "You've done well, Lila," he said finally, his voice quiet but filled with approval. "This is exactly why I trusted you. You've been paying attention, and now you've given me something I can use." Lila didn't know what to say. She had been doing her job, keeping an eye on things, but this was more than she had ever expected. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Dominic's eyes gleamed with a hard, calculating look. "We need to act quickly," he said, his tone flat but filled with authority. "I can't let this go any further. You've done your part, Lila. Now it's time for me to take care of it." As he spoke, Dominic turned toward the phone on his desk and made a quick call. Lila couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see his eyes narrow, his jaw tighten as he gave instructions. The room was filled with an electric tension as Dominic orchestrated his next move. When he hung up the phone, he turned to Lila, his gaze steady. "You've done more than anyone else could have," he said. "I'll take it from here, but I need you to stay vigilant. This isn't over." Lila nodded, a sense of determination rising in her. She had never been more aware of the power dynamics at play. The world she had entered wasn't just about serving the rich and powerful. It was about being part of something much bigger. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. "I'll be ready," she said firmly. Dominic gave her a brief nod, his eyes softening for a moment before he turned back to his desk. Lila left the office, the weight of the situation heavy on her mind. She had learned a lot in the short time she had worked for Dominic. She had seen the undercurrents of power and manipulation, and she knew that this was only the beginning. As she walked back down the hallway, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. She had uncovered something dark, something dangerous, and now it was in Dominic's hands. The days following her conversation with Dominic were a blur for Lila. She had done everything he had asked of her, carefully observing Vincent and uncovering his suspicious actions. Now, Dominic had a plan in motion. Lila was no longer just a silent observer. She was part of something much larger, something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had been living in the shadows for so long, doing her job without question. But now, she had a role to play in a much bigger game. That night, Dominic summoned her once again to his office. This time, there was no casual conversation, no small talk. He looked at her with the same intensity he had shown before, but now, there was something else in his gaze, something that felt heavier. "Lila," he said, his voice firm, "we've confirmed everything. Vincent is not just involved in small-time dealings. He's been running an operation behind my back, one that could undermine everything I've built." Lila felt a chill run down her spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing Dominic say it out loud made everything feel real. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of wealth and power, now felt like a trap. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel her heart racing. Dominic's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, there was silence. He wasn't just the Mafia boss now. He was the man who had entrusted her with something far greater than she had ever expected. "We're going to take him down," Dominic said quietly. "But I need your help. I'm counting on you to get the final piece of the puzzle." Lila nodded. She didn't hesitate. She had already risked so much, and now, there was no turning back. She had already seen the dangerous undercurrent running through the mansion, and now, she would help Dominic cut through it. "What do you need me to do?" Lila asked, her voice unwavering. Dominic leaned forward, his expression serious. "Vincent trusts you," he said. "That's why I'm sending you to him." Lila felt a knot form in her stomach. She had spent weeks observing Vincent, watching his every move, and now she was being asked to get closer to him than ever before. The idea made her uneasy, but she knew she had no choice. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. "What should I say to him?" she asked, her mind already racing through the possible scenarios. Dominic's eyes softened just a fraction. "You don't have to say anything yet," he said. "Just get him to trust you. We need him to feel like he's in control, like he's the one pulling the strings. Once you've gained that trust, we'll take it from there." Lila took a deep breath. She had always been good at keeping her distance, at remaining invisible, but this was different. This wasn't about cleaning rooms or serving drinks. This was about playing a dangerous game, and one wrong move could cost her everything. "I'll do it," Lila said, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Dominic's gaze held hers for a moment longer, then he nodded. "Good. We'll move quickly, but we need to make sure we have everything in place before we act." Lila left his office feeling more determined than ever. She had already changed the course of her life once, and now, she was going to help Dominic take down the man who had been deceiving him for so long. The next few days were filled with careful observation and calculated moves. Lila had been trained in the art of invisibility, and now, she was using that skill to blend into the background while she slowly worked her way into Vincent's circle. She played the role of the helpful, trustworthy maid, the one who would do whatever was asked of her without question. Vincent, as Dominic had predicted, began to open up to her. He was a man who liked control, who enjoyed the power he wielded over others. But he was also arrogant, and that arrogance worked to Lila's advantage. She began to gain his trust, subtly manipulating situations so that he felt secure in his position. She made sure to keep everything in the open, always acting in a way that seemed completely innocent, even as she moved closer to the truth. The longer Lila worked with Vincent, the more she uncovered. He was involved in a web of criminal activities that stretched far beyond anything Dominic had suspected. There were illegal deals being made, people being manipulated, and money being funneled through secret accounts. But Vincent had been careful, too careful. He had left a trail, and Lila was following it, piece by piece. Every conversation, every glance, every action felt like a step closer to bringing him down. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed Dominic's help to finish what she had started. As the days passed, Lila found herself at a crossroads. She had gained Vincent's trust, but now, she was beginning to understand the true depth of the situation. She wasn't just playing a part in a game. She was becoming part of something much larger, something that could change her life forever. She couldn't back out now. She had already come this far, and there was no turning back. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher. Lila had a decision to make, one that would define everything that came next. Lila stood in the dimly lit hallway, her hand resting on the cold brass doorknob of Vincent's office. The weight of what she had to do pressed heavily on her chest. She had spent weeks gaining his trust, carefully navigating the complexities of his arrogance and deception. She had allowed him to believe she was just another maid, another invisible worker in the background. But now, the stakes were higher than ever. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, and she knew it was time. She took a deep breath and turned the knob, stepping into the room. Vincent looked up from his desk, his expression one of surprise, but only for a moment. His smile was cold, calculating. "Lila," he said, his voice smooth. "I didn't expect you tonight. What's on your mind?" Lila's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had played this part long enough, but now she needed to shift gears. She needed him to believe she was on his side, that she trusted him. "I've been thinking," Lila began, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I think it's time we take things to the next level. The boss is getting suspicious. We need to move quickly if we're going to make this work." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest as he studied her. Lila could feel the tension building between them, the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was considering her words, weighing them. "You've been listening, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low. "I like that. Not many people can keep up." Lila didn't flinch. "I know how to handle things," she said, her voice steady. "But I need to know that you're serious. We can't keep playing this game forever." Vincent's eyes gleamed. "Serious?" he repeated, as if the word amused him. "I've been serious from the start." Lila met his gaze, unwavering. "Then let's make a move. I can help you, but we need to be smart about it. We can't let anyone else get in the way." She had rehearsed this moment over and over in her mind. She knew she couldn't show any hesitation, couldn't show fear. If Vincent suspected anything, all of this would fall apart. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his fingers still tapping on the chair. Then, finally, he leaned forward, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I like the way you think," he said. "Let's talk about how we can move forward." Lila had won him over. She had played her part perfectly. But as the conversation continued, as she listened to Vincent outline his next move, she felt a growing unease. The plan was more dangerous than she had imagined. They were going to take things into their own hands, cut Dominic out completely. Lila had no doubt that if Vincent succeeded, the consequences would be disastrous. She had to stop him, but she couldn't act too quickly. She had to wait for the right moment. As the night wore on, Lila's mind raced. She had gained his trust, but now she had to turn the tables. She had to play the game, but she had to do it on her terms. She wasn't just protecting Dominic anymore. She was protecting herself and everyone she cared about. The following days were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Lila had become more involved with Vincent's operations, but she never let down her guard. She had to stay one step ahead, always watching, always listening. The mansion, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. Every room, every hallway was filled with secrets, with lies that could tear everything apart. One evening, after another long day, Lila found herself alone in her quarters, staring out of the window. At the city below, the lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt cold, distant. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something she wasn't prepared for. As she turned away from the window, a knock on the door broke the silence. She opened it to find Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked at her for a moment, then stepped inside without a word. "We need to talk," he said simply. Lila felt her heart skip a beat. She had expected this, but the reality of it hit her like a punch to the gut. She had been playing the game, but now Dominic knew more than she had anticipated. "About Vincent," she said, her voice steady. Dominic nodded, his eyes dark. "I know everything," he said. "I've been watching him, and I've been watching you." Lila felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been careful, but Dominic had always been one step ahead. "You've done well," he continued, his voice soft but full of authority. "But now it's time to finish this. We're going to take him down together." Lila nodded, her mind racing. She had thought she was in control, that she had the upper hand. But now, with Dominic's revelation, everything had changed. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was part of the plan. And this time, there would be no turning back. Lila's heart raced as Dominic spoke, his words hanging in the air between them. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on her, but the storm within her was a mix of fear and resolve. She had been living in the shadows, playing her part, but now, everything was coming to a head. The man who had once been just her employer was now the man she was helping to bring down someone dangerous, someone who had been deceiving them both for months. Lila met Dominic's gaze, her mind working quickly to understand the full scope of what was happening. "What's the next step?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the turbulence she felt inside. Dominic studied her for a moment, a small, approving nod following her question. "We have everything we need to take action, but this has to be quick and clean. I need you to keep doing what you've been doing. Vincent trusts you now. Get him to let his guard down. Once we know where he's going next, we'll strike." Lila nodded, her thoughts racing. She had been building a relationship with Vincent, earning his trust little by little. She had played her role perfectly, and now she had to keep playing it until the right moment came. The room felt like it was closing in on her as Dominic's plan took shape. This wasn't just about Vincent anymore. This was about securing Dominic's empire and ensuring that no one betrayed him again. She had no idea how deep the web of lies went, but she was going to help untangle it, no matter what it took. Over the next few days, Lila continued to observe Vincent, keeping up the facade of the loyal maid. She had learned so much already, and now she was playing her part in a much bigger game. Vincent had no idea that she was working with Dominic, that she was feeding him information every chance she got. He spoke freely in front of her, and she listened carefully, taking note of every word, every gesture. But there were moments when she could see the cracks in his armor. His behavior was becoming more erratic, more paranoid. It was clear that he knew something was wrong, but he didn't yet realize how much danger he was really in. One evening, as Lila was finishing her shift, Vincent called her into his office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the dark city skyline, his posture tense. Lila stepped inside, her heart skipping a beat. She had known this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. "Lila," Vincent said, his voice low, but with an edge to it. "I need to know you're with me. No one else can be trusted. I don't care how long you've worked here. If you're not on my side, you're against me." Lila's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. She couldn't show him the doubt that was swirling inside her. She had already made her decision. She was loyal to Dominic, and she would do whatever it took to bring Vincent down. "I'm with you," she said quietly, her voice firm. "You can count on me." Vincent's eyes narrowed as he studied her. For a moment, Lila thought he might see through her, but then he nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said, "because things are about to get real. I don't trust anyone, but you've proven yourself. Just don't forget who you're working for." The tension in the room was thick as Vincent turned back to the window, his mind clearly elsewhere. Lila's mind, however, was sharp, focused. She had made it this far, and now she needed to stay focused. She needed to wait for the moment when she could finally put an end to Vincent's scheming. The next few days were a blur of calculated moves. Vincent grew more paranoid, but Lila's role didn't change. She was still the maid, still the trusted pair of eyes. But now, every action she took was one step closer to exposing him. She continued to feed Dominic information, carefully watching Vincent's every move, every word. And then, one night, it finally happened. Vincent made a mistake. He let something slip that changed everything. Lila was in the hallway when she overheard a conversation between Vincent and one of his associates. It was brief, but in those few seconds, everything clicked. "We're meeting tomorrow," Vincent said. "I have everything ready. It's time to move." Lila's heart raced. Tomorrow. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. She had to act, and she had to do it quickly. The next morning, Lila found herself back in Dominic's office. She had no time to waste. She had to tell him what she had overheard. As soon as she entered, Dominic looked up from his desk, his eyes sharp and focused. "You know what to do," he said, his voice steady. Lila took a deep breath. "Vincent is meeting with someone tomorrow. He's ready to make his move." Dominic's eyes narrowed, and a small, calculating smile appeared on his face. "Good. We've been waiting for this. It's time to end this." The plan was set in motion. Everything they had worked for, everything Lila had risked, was about to come to fruition. She had helped bring Vincent's secrets into the light, and now, it was time for the final showdown. But even as Dominic's plan took shape, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was only just beginning. The day had arrived. The plan was in motion. Lila's heart was pounding as she stood in the hallway outside of Dominic's office, ready to make the final move. Vincent had made his mistake, and now the ball was in their court. She had carefully followed his every move, watched his every word, and now, everything would culminate in this moment. She was nervous, but also resolute. She had already risked everything to get to this point, and there was no turning back. As she stepped into Dominic's office, the tension in the air was palpable. Dominic was standing near the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the mansion. He turned to face her as she entered, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he studied her closely, as if evaluating her once more. Lila knew what he was thinking. He was gauging her readiness, her resolve. She had earned his trust, but now, she had to prove that she could follow through. "You're sure about this?" Dominic asked finally, his voice steady but sharp. Lila nodded, her throat dry. Yes. Vincent is meeting with someone tonight. It's time. Dominic gave her a small, approving nod. Good. We move tonight, and we move fast. We can't afford any mistakes. Lila could feel the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about Vincent anymore. This was about everything. The mansion, Dominic's empire, her own future. Everything was riding on this. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. Dominic turned to his desk, where several documents were laid out neatly. He picked one up, studying it for a moment before handing it to Lila. Take this to Vincent. He'll be expecting a delivery of sorts, something he thinks he's been waiting for. But you'll be the one delivering it. Get close to him, get the information we need, and then we strike. Lila took the document, her hand brushing against Dominic's briefly. She didn't let it show, but a flicker of something passed between them. There was trust in that touch. Trust that she had earned and now had to live up to. I won't let you down, she said. Dominic's gaze softened for a moment. I know you won't. As Lila left his office, the air felt thick with anticipation. She had been playing a dangerous game with Vincent, and now the endgame had arrived. She made her way to the kitchen to gather what she needed, all the while preparing herself for the confrontation. The mansion felt eerily quiet, the only sound the soft echo of her footsteps as she moved through the halls. When she arrived at Vincent's office, he was seated at his desk, his back to the door. He hadn't noticed her approach. Lila took a deep breath, steadied her hand, and knocked. Vincent turned around, his face lighting up with a sly grin when he saw her. Ah, Lila. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said, his voice dripping with confidence. I have what you asked for, Lila said, holding out the document. Vincent stood and moved toward her, taking the paper from her hands. You've done well, he said, his voice low and appreciative. I knew I could count on you. Lila forced a smile, keeping her composure. Of course. I'm here to help. Vincent seemed pleased, but Lila's mind was elsewhere. She was calculating, moving in sync with the plan, knowing that every word and every action mattered. She had to keep him talking, keep him distracted. Tell me, Vincent, Lila said, her voice casual. What exactly is it that we're moving tonight? You've been so secretive about it. Vincent gave her a sharp look, his eyes narrowing slightly, but he didn't hesitate. You don't need to know all the details, he said, a little too quickly. Let's just say it's something that'll secure my future. Something I've been working on for a while. Lila nodded, pretending to accept the answer. But she could see the tension in his posture, the way his hands clenched as he held the document. It was clear he was hiding something, and Lila could feel the edges of the web tightening around them both. As Vincent turned back to his desk, Lila's eyes flickered to the drawer where he kept his important papers. The moment of truth was near. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and everything would unravel. I'm here if you need anything else, Lila said, her voice soft but purposeful. Vincent didn't look up, but he waved a hand dismissively. Go back to your work, Lila. I'll handle this from here. Lila hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned to leave. But as she stepped out of the office, a cold shiver ran down her spine. The plan was in motion, but now, more than ever, she knew she had to stay focused. She had earned Dominic's trust, and she couldn't afford to fail him. Now, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and soon, everything would change. The trap was set, and she was ready to spring it. But even as she walked down the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent was onto her. She had seen the way his eyes had shifted when she asked her question. He was testing her, just as she had been testing him. The game was far from over. The tension had never been thicker. Lila's mind raced as she walked down the long hallway, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She had given Vincent the document, just as Dominic had instructed, but something in the air felt wrong. Vincent's cold dismissal of her as she left his office still lingered in her mind. It wasn't just the usual arrogance she had seen from him. It was something more. He knew. She couldn't shake the feeling that the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment when the truth would come to light, was fast approaching. She could sense Vincent watching her, his every move scrutinizing hers. The game had changed. As the days passed, Lila found herself becoming more cautious, more aware of the smallest details. The once familiar routine of overseeing the household now felt like a high-stakes game of chess. Every glance, every word, every movement felt like a part of the plan she was executing. The mansion, once a place of stability, now felt like a pressure cooker, each step she took bringing her closer to either victory or ruin. But she couldn't back down. She had made a choice, and it wasn't just about Dominic anymore. It was about herself, about carving a place for herself in a world that had always viewed her as invisible. That night, as Lila stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her uniform before going downstairs, she took a deep breath. She had been in the shadows for too long, but now, it was time to step into the light. Vincent's meeting was fast approaching. He had confirmed the time and place, and Dominic had instructed her to be ready. This was the moment when everything would change. No more playing the role of the innocent maid. No more hiding behind a facade of trust. Lila had gathered everything she needed to bring Vincent down, but now, she needed to use it. As she made her way down the grand staircase, her heart raced in anticipation. She was supposed to be in the background, as always, but tonight, she was the key player. She could feel Dominic's eyes on her, his silent support from the shadows. She was ready. The time had come. When she arrived at Vincent's office, he was waiting for her, his expression unreadable. The door was slightly ajar, and Lila could hear him talking to someone on the phone. She stood in the hallway, waiting, her mind racing. This was it, the moment of truth. Vincent ended the call abruptly and turned to face her as she entered. His eyes narrowed when he saw the expression on her face. "Lila, you're early," he said, his voice thick with suspicion. "Everything okay?" Lila stepped forward, her steps deliberate. "Everything's fine," she replied, her voice calm. "I brought the document you requested. I thought it was time we talked about what comes next." Vincent's eyes flickered, and he took the paper from her hands, scanning it quickly. "You've done well," he said, his voice lower than usual. But Lila could tell that he was no longer entirely comfortable. His facade was starting to crack. "I think it's time we took this to the next level," Lila continued, her tone cool, almost casual. "But before we do, I need you to tell me more. I've been working for you long enough to know when something isn't adding up." Vincent's eyes flickered again, and for a moment, Lila saw a hint of vulnerability in his posture. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the cold, calculating persona she had grown so familiar with. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "I've told you everything you need to know." Lila leaned in slightly, her gaze steady. "I don't think you have," she said softly. "You've been hiding something, Vincent, and I think it's time you told me what it is." For a moment, there was silence between them. Vincent didn't speak. Instead, he took a step back, as though weighing his options. Lila could feel the tension building, her pulse quickening. She had pushed him this far. Now, she needed to make sure he didn't have a way out. Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice low. "You've been loyal, Lila. I'll give you that," he said, his tone darker than ever. "But loyalty only goes so far. I don't trust anyone, not even you." Lila felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't show it. She had known this was coming. She had suspected this from the start, that Vincent would never fully let her in. "What are you planning, Vincent?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent smiled, a wicked grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll see soon enough," he said, his voice cold and final. "Everything is in place. You've done your part. Now, it's time to see who's really in control." Lila's heart skipped a beat as the weight of his words settled over her. This wasn't just about Vincent anymore. This was a game of power, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. As she turned to leave, her mind raced. She had to get back to Dominic. She had to warn him. Vincent's plan was in motion, and she was running out of time. The final move was coming, and Lila knew that she had just played her part in a game she couldn't escape from. The final confrontation was upon them. Lila stood in the hallway, her heart racing as she waited outside Dominic's office. The walls seemed to close in on her, the weight of the situation pressing down as her mind replayed everything that had led to this moment. Vincent had made his move, and now everything rested on the plan that Dominic had meticulously put in place. She had done everything right, fed him the information, gained his trust, but she knew that the last piece of the puzzle was about to fall into place. The tension in the mansion was palpable. It felt as if the whole world had paused, waiting for the inevitable clash. Dominic had told her that tonight would be the turning point, but she hadn't expected how quickly things would escalate. When Dominic opened the door, his cold eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw the weight of the world behind them. "Lila," he said, his voice firm, "it's time. Are you ready?" She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Yes, I've done everything I can. I'm ready. Dominic led her into the office, where his bodyguards were waiting. The plan was simple. Vincent was meeting with one of his secret associates, and they needed to catch him in the act before he could escape or destroy the evidence. But Lila knew this wasn't just about catching a criminal. This was about taking control, about finally breaking free from the life she had been living as a mere pawn. The sound of the mansion's grand clock ticking seemed to fill the room. Every second was critical. We have one shot at this, Dominic said, his gaze unwavering as he met Lila's eyes. You've done well, but this is where it counts. Lila's pulse quickened. It was hard to imagine that this moment had come so quickly. She had always been invisible in the background, a silent observer. But now, she was at the center of it all. I'm ready, she said again, her voice steady despite the nerves that rattled her insides. Dominic nodded, giving her a sharp look. I'm counting on you. Lila walked out of the office and toward the hallway where Vincent was supposed to meet his associate. Her steps were measured, purposeful. She had to act normal, as if nothing had changed. But every part of her was alert, focused on the task at hand. As she reached the end of the hall, she saw Vincent's figure coming into view. He was alone, his posture tense. Lila stopped, pretending to adjust a tray of glasses she had been carrying earlier. Vincent's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she could feel the heat of suspicion in his gaze. Lila, he said, his voice cool but edged with curiosity. What are you doing here? She smiled, keeping her composure. Just making sure everything's in order, she replied, her voice casual. Vincent's eyes lingered on her for a second too long, but then he nodded and walked past her, not giving her a second thought. As he entered the private room where the meeting was scheduled to take place, Lila moved swiftly, her heart racing. This was it. She had to get the evidence. She quickly slipped into the shadows, finding a spot just outside the door, where she could hear the muffled voices from inside. The door creaked slightly as she pressed her ear to it. Vincent's voice was clear now, though quiet. We need to move quickly, he said. Everything's set. It's time to finalize the deal. The money's ready. Lila's heart dropped. The money. This was what Dominic had suspected all along. Vincent was planning to run, taking the money and possibly some other assets that could destroy everything Dominic had worked for. Lila clenched her fists, her mind racing. She needed to act fast. With a deep breath, she stepped back from the door, carefully positioning herself in a place where she could hear every word. She knew she had to get the evidence without getting caught. The meeting continued for a few more moments, but soon, she could hear the distinct sound of footsteps approaching. Lila froze, her heart pounding. There was no time to waste. She quickly ducked into a nearby closet, holding her breath as the door to the room opened. Vincent and his associate walked out, passing by the closet without noticing her. Lila let out a sigh of relief. She had to get back to Dominic, and fast. As she re-entered the hallway, she ran into one of Dominic's trusted bodyguards, who had been keeping watch. Without saying a word, he handed her a small earpiece. The boss is waiting for you, he said. Lila nodded and put it on, her pulse racing as she made her way back to Dominic's office. When she arrived, Dominic was already on the phone, his voice low and intense. As soon as he saw her, he held up his hand to signal for her to wait. The conversation was brief, but when Dominic hung up, he turned to her, his eyes sharp. We've got him, he said, his voice calm but filled with satisfaction. Vincent made his move, and now, we're going to end this. You've done more than I could have asked. Lila felt a rush of relief wash over her, but she knew it wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning. Dominic's empire was safe, but the world they had been living in, one of secrets and lies, had shifted. She had done what she had set out to do, but the cost of it all was still unknown. Dominic turned toward the door, his eyes meeting hers. Let's finish this, he said, his voice steady. And with that, Lila knew that she had crossed a line, one she could never go back from.